We're deep in the flowering phase, and weeks 5 and 6 are upon us. The majority of our work as cultivators lies behind us, and it's time to start planning for late-stage flowering, gauging when is the optimum time to harvest, and preparing for everything we'll need as we move into the drying, trimming, and curing phases. I'm Dr. Judd with GreenCert MD. Let's get into it. If you're new here, welcome. We're glad you're here. Please take a moment to support the channel by clicking like, smashing that subscribe button, and ringing the bell so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming content. As always, this content is provided for medical educational purposes only. I'm not diagnosing or treating any condition you may have, and please know and comply with all laws wherever you may live. In our last video, we covered the first few weeks of the flowering phase. If you missed it, click here to check it out. In week 5, we can now observe our buds continuing to increase in thickness, with buds starting to fill in along the main cola. You should also notice an increasing characteristic odor of flowering cannabis. The small, white hairs called pistils may start to change color, and trichomes are now very apparent, with some beginning to move from clear to opaque. So now that we're into week 5 and our plants have stopped growing, now would be a great time to build in some extra support for the future buds using stakes and plant tape. I'm simply placing 3 or 4 stakes in a triangular or rectangular pattern around the plant and ringing the plant with the green plant tape so that branches have something to lean against. Later in the grow, we will introduce these little guys, yo-yo plant supports, which I hang from above and attach directly to heavy branches that are having difficulty supporting their weight. I realize that we haven't touched on the use of trellis netting, something I consider a more intermediate to advanced grower's tool, but we will cover that in an upcoming video. So week 6 presents with more weight, more coloring of the pistils, and more opaque trichomes. It's now that I am usually turning my attention to gauging when is going to be the optimum time to harvest. So this is an important point. Plants do not necessarily age at the same rate, even amongst the same strain, and especially if you are running different strains, such as 2 sativa predominant and 2 indica predominant strains. As you can see here, these 2 plants are clearly at different stages. This one is looking much farther along, with yellow pistils and an increasing amount of opaque trichomes, and appears to be on track for an 8 to 9 week grow cycle, while the other plant appears about a week or so behind in bud maturation and is likely going to need a full 10-week flowering phase. This is important because I need to decide whether to continue with an 8 or 10-week schedule for my nutrient feedings. I need to plan for flushing, which is itself a point of contention among growers, and I also need to plan for how I am going to dry the harvest once I cut it down. As a new grower, you may only have this one tent, and if you need to be able to hang your harvest and dry it inside that tent, then obviously all the plants need to come down at the same time. That means perhaps running 1 or more plants a little longer while taking another a few days earlier than you'd like so that you can get to a point where it makes sense to go ahead and take all of the plants. So how do I decide when to harvest? So when looking to determine when to harvest my plants, there are a few things I'm looking for. First, there's always the breeder's schedule. Most seeds available today will tell you a general time frame as to how long the flowering period will last for that seed. You can use that as a guide, but of course, we're mainly interested in signs demonstrated by the plants themselves. For those, our initial one that we see is signs of the plant consuming its stored nutrients, causing yellowing and dying of the leaves. This indicates that the plant is nearing the end of its life cycle, though this is a very general marker. Second, we have pistils, which will turn yellow to brown, which again tells us the plant and bud is maturing. I usually like to see 80% having turned brown to indicate a good harvest window. But the most reliable predictor is, of course, the trichomes themselves. Trichomes are the tiny, sticky, crystal-like outgrowths on the buds and leaves that produce the good stuff from cannabis, such as cannabinoids and terpenes. Trichomes are tiny, and we use a loupe or microscope to see them. These can be purchased online or at your local grow shop, and an affiliate link to both a digital microscope for your phone and a traditional loupe are in the description below. As your cannabis is flowering, these trichomes change color, moving from crystal clear to milky white, and then finally to an amber color. If the tiny mushroom heads are all still crystal clear, then there is still a ways to go. By the time most of the trichomes have turned milky white color, your cannabis should be just about ready. But know that when you choose to harvest can also affect the resulting high. Harvesting when trichomes are mostly milky, with just a few amber heads, usually results in more of an upper high. Wait for more amber heads to appear and the effect will become more sedative. Many cultivators choose to harvest when around 15% of the trichomes have turned amber and the rest are milky white. When we cut these plants down, we're going to need to hang them, and I have found that these hanging drying racks are great for this purpose. They hang easily in your tent, and they allow the plant branches to not be laying on a surface or touching, increasing airflow around them and aiding in uniform drying. We will cover drying as a dedicated video later in the series. Other gear to get now to prepare would be scissors to trim and containers to cure in. For scissors, I generally like the Saboten offerings, but basically find one that feels good in your hand. There are many brands out there that'll work just fine for this purpose. For curing, many traditional growers use mason jars, and if you go that route, I would generally recommend the wide-mouth versions for ease of access. I also find the 16-ounce ones tend to be about the perfect size for curing. I have also used these types of stainless steel airtight containers, this one's from Private Reserve, for storing larger amounts, especially when trimming. Finally, you'll likely do well to have a trimming bin to catch keef and trimmings so that you can keep your area reasonably tidy during that process. Again, we will be covering drying, trimming, and curing in detail in upcoming videos. So there you go. We've entered the home stretch of the late flowering phase, and before you know it, harvest will be here. If you found this video helpful, please leave us a comment below, and if you would like to support the channel, consider supporting us on Patreon, link in the description below. Our patrons have access to us for growing questions, help with determining topics for the channel, and paid members are automatically enrolled in our monthly giveaways for things every grower loves. So that'll do it for now, and until I see you again, puff puff and pass it on.